You think you know someone because you have heard their words, watched their behavior, and seen the version of themselves they choose to show the world. But what if the real person is hiding somewhere else? Not in what they say, not in how successful, kind, confident, or charming they appear, but in two moments they cannot fully control. Watch who someone judges with unusual intensity, and watch what happens when their carefully constructed image is threatened. Because when the mask begins to crack, something deeper starts speaking. The person you thought you knew may suddenly reveal a side of themselves they have spent years hiding. And the most unsettling part is this: these two signs don't only expose other people. They expose you, the traits that trigger you, the people you cannot stand, the moments when you become defensive. The things you condemn most intensely may be pointing towards something buried inside your own psyche. Once you understand these two psychological patterns, you will start seeing human behavior differently. And you may never look at your own judgments or the people around you in quite the same way again. So let's begin, slowly, because what you're about to hear cannot be unheard. Somewhere right now, there is a version of you that only exists in front of certain people. A voice you use at work that isn't quite the voice you use at home. A laugh you perform in rooms where you feel unsafe. A silence you keep around people who might see too much. This isn't dishonesty, it's architecture. Every human being who has ever lived has built something like this. Psychologists call it the persona, a word borrowed from the ancient theater, where actors wore carved masks to announce, before speaking a single line, exactly who they were playing that night. You have a mask too, several in fact, and so does everyone you have ever met. Take a breath and let that idea settle for a moment, because it is not an accusation. It is simply the truth of what it means to live among other people. The persona is not a lie you tell. It is a bridge you build, so that the raw, unfiltered, chaotic material of your inner world can walk across into a room full of strangers without frightening them, or you. We build this mask early. A child learns within the first few years of life which parts of themselves earn approval and which parts earn silence, punishment, or the quiet withdrawal of love. Anger might be met with fear in a parent's eyes. Sadness might be met with irritation. Joy might be met with a hush, a finger to the lips, a warning that this is not the time or the place. And so, without ever making a conscious decision, the child begins to sort. This part of me is safe to show. This part of me is not. The safe parts get rehearsed, refined, rewarded. They become the persona, the socially acceptable self, the one who gets invited back, the one who gets hired, the one who gets loved, or so it seems. The unsafe parts don't disappear. They can't. Energy doesn't vanish inside a psyche any more than it vanishes inside a universe. It goes somewhere. It goes underground. Carl Jung had a name for that underground place. He called it the shadow. Not evil, not necessarily even bad, simply unlit. The parts of you that never got permission to stand in the light of your own conscious identity. The rage you were taught was dangerous. The need you were taught was weak. The desire you were taught was shameful. The brilliance you were taught was arrogant, so you dimmed it, quietly, so no one would notice you doing it, including yourself. Here is the part that should unsettle you, gently, the way a cold draft unsettles a warm room. The shadow does not stay still. It does not simply sit in the dark, waiting patiently to be invited up into the light. It leaks. It presses against the walls of the persona from the inside, looking for cracks, looking for moments when your guard is down, looking for a doorway out. And this is where the two reveals begin. Because there are exactly two situations in which the shadow tends to slip past the guard of the persona, however briefly, however subtly, and show its face to a watchful observer. The first is judgment. The second is threat. Watch who someone judges with disproportionate intensity, and you are watching, whether they know it or not, a map of their own unclaimed territory. Watch what happens when their image is questioned, criticized, or embarrassed. And you are watching the mask under real pressure. The way engineers test a bridge, not by admiring its architecture in calm weather, but by loading it with weight and watching where it bends. Stay with me here, because this next part will ask something of you that most videos never ask. It will ask you to stop thinking only about the people in your life and start turning this lens slowly, carefully, toward yourself. Let's begin with the first reveal. Watch who they judge most harshly, not disagree with, not critique, judge. There is a difference, and once you learn to feel that difference in your body, you will never unfeel it again. Jung described a psychological mechanism so common, so universal that most people enact it dozens of times a day without ever noticing. He called it projection. In simple terms, projection happens when a quality that actually lives inside us, a quality we have refused to acknowledge, refused to integrate, refused to even look at directly, gets cast outward, like a shadow thrown by a lamp onto another person. And then we react to that person as though the quality belongs entirely to them. Picture two people witnessing the exact same event. A colleague makes a bold, slightly arrogant statement in a meeting. One observer thinks interesting, a bit much, and moves on with their day, forgetting it by lunch. The other observer feels something hot rise in their chest, contempt, irritation that seems too large for the moment, a private seething judgment that repeats itself in their mind hours later, replaying the audacity of that person, the nerve, the sheer unearned confidence. Same event, wildly different internal weather. What accounts for the difference? The second observer is very likely standing in front of a mirror they don't know is a mirror. Somewhere inside them lives a suppressed desire to take up space, to speak boldly, to claim confidence without apology, a desire that was punished, mocked, or shamed at some point along the way, so thoroughly that it was buried, disowned, pushed into the unlit rooms of the shadow. And when they encounter someone else freely expressing that very quality, unashamed, untroubled, walking around in the light with the exact thing they themselves were forced to hide, something old and wounded flinches. That flinch is not really about the other person. It only looks that way from the outside. This is the strange, almost unbelievable law of the shadow. We are least tolerant of the traits in others that we have most severely exiled in ourselves. Notice I did not say we judge harshly the traits we consider objectively bad. Cruelty, dishonesty, selfishness, these can certainly trigger judgment, but not all judgment of them is projection. Sometimes contempt is simply accurate moral perception. The signal you're looking for is not whether the judgment is correct. It's whether the emotional charge is disproportionate, whether it lingers, whether it returns to you uninvited late at night, replaying itself with a heat that the actual situation doesn't quite justify. That heat is the clue. That heat is the shadow knocking from the inside. And here is the twist that most conversations about projection leave out entirely, the twist that Jung himself considered essential, and that will complicate everything you think you understand about your own reactions. We don't only project the traits we're ashamed of. We also project the traits we haven't yet given ourselves permission to claim, even the good ones. This is sometimes called the golden shadow, and it can feel, on the surface, like the opposite of contempt. It feels like admiration. Sometimes it feels like obsession. Think of the person you can't stop watching, the one whose confidence, creativity, freedom, or charisma seems to occupy far too much space in your mind. You call it inspiration. Sometimes it is. But sometimes, if you're honest with yourself in the quiet hours, it curdles into something closer to longing, or envy, or a strange ache you can't quite name, a sense that they are living a truth that belongs, somehow to you too, a truth you have not yet had the courage to live. That excessive admiration is projection wearing a brighter mask. It says this quality is not fully mine yet, so I will worship it in someone else rather than build it in myself. Both directions point to the same underground room. Contempt and excessive admiration are two doors into the identical hidden chamber. One door is marked with disgust. The other is marked with longing. Walk through either one, and you find the same unclaimed self waiting on the other side. So here is the question I want you to sit with, not answer quickly, not brush past the way you might scroll past a stranger's opinion online, but actually sit with, the way you'd sit with a difficult letter you weren't ready to open. Who triggers you more than they logically should? Not the person who mildly annoys you, not the person you simply disagree with. The person who occupies real estate in your mind that they haven't earned. The person whose name alone can shift your mood. The person you find yourself narrating conversations to, defending yourself against, in the shower, in the car, in the silence before sleep, even though they aren't there, even though they may never know any of this is happening. That person is not simply information about them. That person is information about you. I want you to notice something about the sentence I just said, because your mind may have quietly resisted it. It's uncomfortable to consider that your strongest reactions to other people might be, at least in part, about you. It's much more comfortable to believe that your judgment is pure, objective, simply an accurate reading of someone else's flaws. That comfort is exactly the mechanism the persona was built to protect. And so gently, without forcing anything, I want to invite you to hold both truths at once. Sometimes your judgment of someone is accurate, and sometimes, underneath that accuracy, there is also a mirror you haven't looked into yet. This is the first reveal. Watch who they judge, watch who you judge, and you begin to see the outline of a hidden architecture, a floor plan of the unconscious, sketched not in words, but in reactions. But projection alone doesn't tell the whole story. There is a second moment, rarer, more volatile, more revealing than almost anything else in human interaction. A moment when the persona itself, the carefully built mask, comes under direct attack, and what happens in that moment cannot be faked for very long. What happens in that moment cannot be faked for very long. Think about the people you know who seem, on the surface, endlessly composed, smooth, unshakable. The ones who always seem to have the right words, the right posture, the right amount of confidence in every room they enter. Now think about what happens to that composure when something unexpected slices through it. Not a gentle disagreement, not a polite correction, a direct hit, an accusation. A mistake so undeniable it cannot be reframed, rebranded, or spun into something flattering. A moment where their competence, their integrity, or their self-image is suddenly, publicly, unmistakably in question. Watch closely, because this is where the second reveal lives. Jung would have called this a confrontation with the persona's limits. In plainer language, it's the moment the mask is tested under real pressure, the way a dam is tested not by calm water but by flood. Some people in that moment do something remarkable. They pause. There's a flicker, barely visible, a half second where you can almost see them deciding what to do with the information. And then, instead of collapsing into defense, they lean toward it. They ask a question. They say something like, "Tell me more," or "You might be right, let me think about that." Their face doesn't harden. Their voice doesn't sharpen. Something in them seems almost relieved, as though the truth, even an uncomfortable one, is less exhausting to carry than the performance of having no flaws at all. That response is rare, and it is precious, because it tells you something almost nothing else can tell you as quickly. It tells you this person has at some point done the long, unglamorous work of building a relationship with their own shadow. They are not fused with their mask. They can let it be questioned without their entire sense of self collapsing along with it. Now watch the other response, the much more common one. The eyes narrow first, almost imperceptibly. Then comes the justification, quick practice, sometimes even convincing. Then, if the pressure continues, the tone shifts, defensive at first, then sharper, then cold. Sometimes it turns outward entirely, an accusation thrown back with surprising speed, as though the fastest way to survive an attack on the self is to launch one of their own. Sometimes it turns into withdrawal instead, a sudden chill, a door quietly closing behind the eyes, a conversation that technically continues but has, in every way that matters, already ended. This is mask maintenance. This is the persona fighting for its life, because on some unconscious level, that's exactly what it believes is happening. Not a disagreement, a death. Understand something important here, because this is where a lot of people misread the signs. The intensity of someone's defensive reaction is rarely proportional to the size of the actual criticism. A small, almost throwaway comment can sometimes trigger an explosion completely disproportionate to what was said. That gap between the size of the trigger and the size of the reaction is not noise. It's data. It tells you the comment didn't just land on the surface. It slipped past the persona and struck something underneath, something the person has been guarding for a very long time, possibly since childhood, possibly since a moment they don't even consciously remember anymore. And here is something that will change how you watch every human interaction for the rest of your life, if you let it. You don't need a crisis to see this. You don't need a scandal, a public failure, a dramatic confrontation. The mask slips in far smaller moments most people are too busy, too polite, or too self-absorbed to notice. Watch someone when they're kept waiting a few extra minutes for something they expected instantly. Watch someone when a compliment they were clearly fishing for doesn't arrive. Watch someone when a joke they told, with visible pride, lands in silence instead of laughter. Watch someone when they're mildly, gently disagreed with, in front of other people, about something they consider part of their identity. These moments look small from the outside, almost forgettable, but the body doesn't lie the way the mouth can. Watch the jaw. Watch whether a smile stays in the eyes or retreats only to the mouth. Watch the half-second of stillness before a recovery. Watch whether their next sentence is generous or subtly punishing. Watch what happens to their tone. Not their words, their tone, when the room's attention shifts away from them and onto someone else. These micro-moments, stitched together over weeks, months, years of knowing someone, will tell you more true, unfiltered information about their inner architecture than 1,000 hours of polished conversation ever could. Because polished conversation is the persona performing exactly as designed. These small cracks are the only place the performance briefly forgets itself. I want you to pause here just for a moment and let a quieter, more uncomfortable question rise to the surface. What happens to you in these small moments? Not the dramatic ones, the small ones. The joke that doesn't land, the compliment that doesn't come, the disagreement in front of others. What moves through you in that half second before you regain control of your own face? Stay with that. Don't rush past it. We'll return to it soon, because this entire video has been quietly building toward a single unavoidable turn, and we are almost there. But first, there's one more layer, because noticing these two reveals in someone else is only half the picture. The far more important question is what someone does after the mask has slipped. Call this the integration test, because it is the single clearest indicator of psychological maturity that exists. Here is the truth that should offer you a strange kind of relief. Having a shadow is not the problem. Having disowned traits, uncomfortable impulses, hidden wounds, is not a character flaw. It is simply what it means to be a conscious being living inside an unconscious mind far larger than the part you can see. Every single person you have ever admired has a shadow. Every spiritual teacher, every wise elder, every composed, grounded person you've ever looked up to. The difference between them and someone ruled by their shadow was never the absence of darkness. It was their relationship to it. So when someone's shadow briefly surfaces, whether through a disproportionate judgment or a defensive reaction under pressure, the real test isn't whether it happened. It will always happen to all of us repeatedly for as long as we live. The real test is what happens in the moments afterward. Does the person deny it outright, insisting the reaction never occurred, rewriting the last 5 minutes in real time? Does the person counterattack, turning the conversation into an assault on whoever pointed it out, so the spotlight moves quickly away from them? Or does something else happen? A pause, a flicker of discomfort that isn't immediately buried, a willingness, even a reluctant one, to sit with the possibility that something true, something uncomfortable, just surfaced, and that it might be worth looking at rather than burying again. That pause is everything. That pause is the difference between someone who is slowly integrating their shadow, becoming, in Jung's language, more whole, and someone who is tightening their grip on the mask with every passing year, becoming more brittle, more reactive, more disconnected from themselves, even as the mask itself grows more polished on the outside. This is worth repeating, slowly, because it overturns how most people evaluate character. We tend to judge people by whether they have flaws. That's the wrong measurement, and it always has been. Everyone has flaws. The real measurement, the one that actually predicts how someone will treat you over the course of years, is whether they can look at their own flaws without flinching into denial or attack. Now, here is where everything you've just learned turns back around, quietly, almost without warning, and points directly at you. Because every single person you have ever read, using exactly the 2 signs we've just explored, was also, in that very same moment, reading you. Every judgment you've made about someone else's excessive reaction was made through the lens of your own unclaimed material. Every time you've noticed someone's mask slipping under pressure, you were noticing it with a nervous system that has its own mask, its own pressure points, its own carefully defended rooms. This isn't a flaw in the framework. This is the framework, completed. The traits that trigger you most intensely in others are rarely random. They are coordinates. They point with uncanny accuracy toward exactly the parts of yourself you have not yet turned to face. And the way you respond when your own image is challenged, whether you soften into curiosity or harden into defense, is not incidental either. It is a live, ongoing readout of how much of your own shadow you have actually welcomed home, and how much you're still standing guard against. This means something quietly radical. Every irritating person in your life is potentially a teacher you didn't ask for. Every uncomfortable moment where someone questioned your competence, embarrassed you, or caught you in a mistake was potentially a doorway disguised as a threat. The deeper you understand this, the less need you will feel to constantly diagnose the people around you. That's important enough to say plainly, because there's a real danger in everything we've discussed tonight, and I don't want to leave it unspoken. It would be easy, after learning something like this, to become a kind of amateur psychoanalyst, picking apart every friend, every partner, every coworker, silently cataloging their projections and their defense mechanisms, feeling a quiet, superior thrill each time you spot a crack in someone's mask. I want to be honest with you, that is not wisdom. That is the ego borrowing the language of depth psychology to build an even more sophisticated mask, one that says, I see through everyone, while still refusing to see through itself. Real psychological insight does not create distance from other people. It creates compassion for them because you begin to recognize that their defensiveness, their harsh judgments, their brittle reactions under pressure, are not signs of a bad person. They are signs of a wounded one, someone still guarding rooms they were never taught how to open safely. That recognition doesn't mean you tolerate cruelty or stay in relationships that harm you. It means you stop needing to feel superior in order to protect yourself. You can see clearly and still remain kind. In fact, real clarity almost always leads there. And there's a second warning worth naming directly. Never use what you've learned tonight as a weapon. Never take someone's visible wound, the trait they judge too harshly, the trigger that makes them defensive, and press on it deliberately to control them, to win an argument, to make yourself feel powerful in their presence. That is not psychology. That is manipulation wearing psychology's clothing, and it will corrode you far more than it ever damages the person you use it on, because every time you exploit someone else's shadow, you feed your own. So let's bring everything together now, gently, the way the final piece of a long piece of music resolves back into its opening note. 2 signs reveal who someone really is beneath the mask they've spent a lifetime perfecting, what they judge with an intensity that outweighs the moment, and how they respond when their image is threatened, whether they soften or they fight. But the true revelation tonight was never really about them. It was always, quietly, patiently, waiting for you underneath both of the reveals. So I'll leave you with the same 2 questions. Turn now fully toward yourself. What do your strongest judgments reveal about you? Not your reasonable disagreements. Your strongest ones. The reactions that outlast the moment, that replay themselves uninvited, that carry more heat than the situation seems to justify. And what happens when your own image is challenged? When someone questions your competence, catches your mistake, disagrees with the version of yourself you've worked so hard to present. Do you close or do you open? Do you defend or do you look? There is no need to answer these questions quickly or perform an answer for anyone, even yourself. Some of the most important truths in a human life take years to fully surface, and that's all right. The goal was never instant transformation. The goal was simply to plant a seed of honest attention. one that will quietly keep working long after this video ends. The next time someone irritates you more than they should, the next time your own mask feels the pressure of being questioned. Because real freedom was never about controlling how other people see you, or perfecting your ability to read them. It was always about how honestly you are willing to see yourself. The more honestly you can see your own shadow, the less power other people's shadows have over you.